Daniel Reese woke to the sound of a dog barking, a sharp, insistent yap that pierced the fog of sleep. His eyes snapped open, expecting the familiar cracked ceiling of his Chicago apartment. Instead, he stared at wooden beams strung with cobwebs, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and pine. He sat up, heart pounding, on a sagging cot in a dimly lit cabin. A lantern flickered on a rough-hewn table beside him, casting shadows that danced like specters. He didn't own a cabin. He didn't own a dog. The door creaked open, and a woman stepped in, mid-30s, auburn hair tied back, her face weathered but kind. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Morning, Dan. You sleep okay?" Her voice was warm, familiar, yet it sent a chill down his spine. He didn't know her. Who are you?" he stammered, clutching the thin blanket. "Where am I?" Her smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of concern. "It's me, Sarah. Your wife. We're at the cabin, like always." She set a mug of coffee on the table, the steam curling upward. "You hit your head pretty hard yesterday chopping wood. Doc said you might be fuzzy for a bit." Daniel's stomach lurched. He wasn't married. He lived alone, a quiet accountant who spent his nights with spreadsheets, not axes. He touched his head, no bump, no pain. "I don't remember any of this," he said, voice trembling. "I don't belong here." Sarah's expression tightened, but she patted his arm. "It'll come back. Let's get you some air." She led him outside, where a grey sky hung low over a dense forest. A black lab bounded up, licking his hand, and Sarah laughed. "See? Rusty knows you." The day unraveled like a fever dream. Neighbors stopped by, gruff men in flannel, women with knowing nods, all calling him Dan with a familiarity that clawed at his sanity. They spoke of his life, the cabin he'd built, the hunting trips, the fire that killed his parents 10 years back. Each detail was vivid, precise, yet alien. He remembered none of it. His real life, Chicago, his tiny apartment, his dull routine, felt like a fading echo. By nightfall, dread coiled in his gut. He sat by the fireplace, Sarah humming as she knit, Rusty snoring at his feet. The normalcy was suffocating. He whispered, "This isn't real," testing the words. Sarah's humming stopped. She looked up, her eyes sharp, almost glowing in the firelight. "What did you say, Dan?" "I don't know you," he said, louder. "I don't know this place. I woke up in my bed yesterday, in the city. This isn't my life." The room grew colder. Sarah set her knitting down, her movement slow, deliberate. "You're confused," she said, but her voice was wrong, too deep, layered, like multiple voices speaking at once. Rusty growled, hackles up, staring at him. The wall seemed to pulse, the air thickening until it pressed against his chest. He bolted outside, the forest swallowing the cabin's light. Branches clawed at his face as he ran, voices whispering from the shadows, "Dan, come back, you belong here." He tripped, sprawling into a clearing where a circle of stones glowed faintly under the moon. In the center stood a figure, himself, but not. It was him as he remembered, short hair, city clothes, eyes wide with terror. The figure flickered, then vanished, footsteps crunched behind him. Sarah emerged, but she wasn't Sarah anymore. Her face stretched, skin peeling back to reveal a hollow, eyeless mask, her mouth a gaping maw. "You can't leave," she hissed, her voice a chorus of the damned. "We made this for you. You're ours." Daniel screamed as hands, cold, unseen, grabbed him, dragging him back toward the cabin. The forest twisted, the sky bled red, and the last thing he saw was his reflection in a puddle, not the man he knew, but a stranger with hollow eyes, smiling when morning came. Dan Reese chopped wood outside the cabin, whistling a tune he didn't remember learning. Sarah watched from the porch, her smile perfect, and Rusty wagged his tail. The man who'd woken up a stranger was gone, buried deep in a reality that claimed him, one he'd never escape.